my friends? We meet again. It's been a while. Where should we begin? Today, we are looking at the culminating track off of Death's 6th album, Symbolic, and that song is Perennial Quest. Now, Perennial Quest occupies a very, very unique place in Death's discography. It is sort of like the unofficial closing song of Death, which means at the time of its release in 1995, this was intended to be the last Death album before Chuck moved on to Control Denied. Thus, Perennial Quest was intended to be the last Death song, but we'll get to that a little bit later here. Now, Perennial Quest is one of Death's most emotionally heavy songs, complete with tremendous riffs, crushing poetry, and hauntingly beautiful melodies. It also gives us some insight into perhaps what may have been Chuck's own philosophical beliefs, all of which we will get to later, but if you are at all familiar with Stoic philosophy, you will undoubtedly see the same ideas in the lyrics as you do in the text. To start off this deep dive here, let us take a look at the title of the song itself. Perennial Quest is such an interesting title, and it packs so much information into just 2 words. So let's split those up and then break them down. But before we begin here, if you enjoy these deep dives, make sure you hit that like button and also subscribe as well. It helps appease the almighty YouTube algorithm. And if you want to support me, join my YouTube membership and my Patreon. And shout out to my patrons and members here. You guys are the best. Now anyways, let's look at the word perennial here. To me, the first thing that comes to mind is my mom and my grandma talking about their perennial plants, their flowers, right? Which, you know, I'm no plant expert or biologist, obviously, so this is a vast oversimplification, but these perennials that they called them would grow in the spring and the summer and then die and lay dormant throughout the fall and winter, only to once again come back to life in the spring, right? In a sort of never-ending cycle, these perennial plants grow and die every single year. In essence, we can view a perennial as never-ending, persistent, continual cycle. Another use of the word perennial which comes to mind is the spiritual philosophy perennialism, which, to be very, very brief here, is the view that the world's religions, spiritual traditions, mystics, and philosophers all sort of share this common metaphysical themes and truths, a common wisdom between them all. Essentially, all religions or spiritual beliefs are giving similar answers to the same question. Now, of course, this is a vast, vast oversimplification, so I recommend checking out the Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley. Yes, that same guy who wrote Brave New World, for more information about this if you were interested. Now, I am entirely unsure about whether or not Chuck was aware of this branch of philosophy, but judging from some of his other songs as well as previous band members, I would say there's a fair chance that he did. But whether or not this is what he meant, we will get to later. Now, with that, along with our first definition of perennial, we can include the words common, transcendent, universal, and universal is an interesting word as well. Uni meaning one, and verse, originally meaning in Latin turn, but of course is also we get the word verse as in poetry and in songs, right? So we can look as universe as one turn, one cycle, one verse, one song. Okay, great. Now what about the word quest here? For this one, we just head right to the dictionary. A quest is an instance of seeking, an investigation, a pursuit, a search. As well, of course, we have the more romantic view here, meaning a long and arduous journey. Thus, putting all these words together, we have perennial quest, a universal investigation, a never-ending journey, a transcendent pursuit, or to put it into even more words, we can call it a continual search for some sort of universal truth and understanding. Now, I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down here. It really is amazing just how much meaning is packed into the title of the song, and this title and the words associated with this title are all throughout the song here, but we'll get to that, right? Now, interestingly enough, I pored over all the Chuck interviews I could find online regarding Symbolic. In an interview with Spark magazine in 1995, he had this to say about Perennial Quest, the song. Quote, "Perennial quest for the feeling of happiness in life. I think we're always looking for something. Happiness, all we want to reach, what we believe in, but there are various barriers which stop it. For example, jealousy, reputation, public opinion, deceit. These all impede people reaching what they want. As far as I'm concerned, I don't ask for anything complicated. I want to live my life, pay the bills, feed my dogs and cats, simply to live and not to bother anyone. My life is never-ending questing." End quote. Very, very interesting quote here by Chuck. So, now armed with this knowledge, let us dive into the song itself. So now the journey begins. Sorry, I had to make that joke. With this sort of odd meandering riff, it just simply starts right away. No intro or anything like that. It almost sounds like we are joining in on something which is already in motion, right? But the riff here is rather strange. It feels aimless, almost lost. It's hard to pin down a key and a mode to it. It's sort of giving like this D Locrian feel, yet also has a D minor feel to it. In a way, this aimless riff is setting the stage for the rest of the song. Someone who is lost, aimlessly drifting through life, without their perennial quest, we could say. Very, very interesting. Now, this riff never gets repeated again after this, right? It's really just genius songwriting through music here. We're joining somebody who is aimless and lost before they're on their perennial quest. They don't have a home mode, they don't have a key, they don't have their journey, they don't have their own perennial quest to embark on, right? However, we then get introduced to this harmonized lead. It sounds very exotic and foreign, very exciting, giving even more modal ambiguity here. Often in Death, we see these leads get harmonized in straight fifths. It's a pretty common theme throughout Death's music. Yet here, however, the lead is harmonized with all sorts of intervals. It's very sort of unusual for Death. Here, I've put them all together on piano so you can hear it better. And now with the riff played underneath. Again, it sounds very extraordinary, it sounds otherworldly, it sounds exciting, enticing, almost divine in a sense. It's like impossible to pick a mode and a key here, it's just everything, right? Everything all at once. Again, sort of emphasizing this lost and aimless feel, but in a way, it almost sounds like this lead is calling out to the person of the story. Maybe this lead is the sound of curiosity, you know, the sound of the grand mysteries of life and the universe. Again, really incredible songwriting here, and we're only like 15 seconds into the song. Thus, we then move into the first verse. Where we see a much more traditional Death style riff, complete with a definite note and key, that being D minor with a little flourish of harmonic minor, as well as an increase in energy which mostly comes from Gene Hoglan's excellent drumming increasing intensity. This riff is played in 6/4 time, which is fairly uncommon and odd, and the drumming and rhythm here almost feels like it is uneasy, maybe stumbling a bit. Really cool drumming here by Gene to sort of give the sort of beginning of a journey feel, right? You're sort of stumbling and starting out. Basically, we can view this as the person starting their journey, no longer aimless but with a definite direction. This, of course, is confirmed by the lyrics, which we get the first stanza from Chuck here. Quote, "The journey begins with curiosity and evolves into soul-felt questions. On the stones that we walk and choose to make our path, sometimes never knowing, other times knowing too much," end quote. I will be getting in depth into the lyrics later on after the song here, but right away we can see that Chuck is describing a person who is embarking on a deep and transformative journey, which often can be overwhelming due to the scale of the questions being asked. Now, the riff being played underneath here brings forth images of scenery traveling by, like you were on a train, looking out the window, only getting brief glimpses and details of people and scenery as you speed by. On the stones that we walk. The next passage we move into is a very strange and eclectic sounding piece of music. Gene Hoglan does some very heavy work here as he plays this sort of odd and almost stumbly beat and a 10/4 time signature. Not an easy feat to make this sound good, right? And Gene always makes it sound as smooth as silk. He really is a big part of what gives Symbolic its signature sound. And to me, this passage, which again abandons the D minor key and moves squarely into the G Phrygian scale. Now, G Phrygian is very sort of exotic sounding scale, and the way it is played here gives a sort of mysterious and ponderous vibe to it, especially when we remove the steady pulse of the drums and bass and put this onto a piano. It sounds like a person maybe gathering knowledge and experience, maybe doing some readings or research, or maybe through the teachings of some sort of tutor or mentor, right? It just sounds very studious, for lack of a better term, right? Great storytelling by Chuck here again, and I really would like to highlight the bass playing here by Kelly Conlon. On the second repeat of the riff, he breaks away from playing in unison with the guitars and instead plays these sporadic pulses underneath, which really serves to highlight the eccentricity of this passage to me. It's really, really cool. Now, the flow that is established in this weird section is then broken by these big tom slams and held power chords in the next section. Extremely abruptly, the song just sort of stops mid-stride. It almost feels like a snap out of it moment, right? Or perhaps even a moment of clarity, one could call it. This is reinforced by the next stanza of the lyrics, which Chuck screams out. Filtering out the bad that holds us back, take hold of what is true, to your hunger. Yet, on the line of to your hunger, the band once again abruptly switches gears. This time they vastly increase the tempo and intensity with some very, very fast riffage. Very, very classic death riffage here as well, which is a very big juxtaposition from what they were playing before, right? If they had kept up the slower pounding pace for any longer, it may become too much, yet the brief slowdown and, for lack of a better word, breakdown of the instruments here really makes the next passage and riff feel that much more faster and intense. It really sort of highlights the hunger, right? It's just a hunger, right? And it's very, very intense and ferocious sounding. Quote, a hunger that will not go away. Plans for tomorrow, they will remain. End quote. Then, seemingly just as abruptly, they again switch into another new riff. Which, you know, some people could view this as too many abrupt changes, but to me, it's quite clear that Chuck can write these smooth transitions. Just go look at stuff on Human or Individual Thought Patterns. However, I think on Symbolic going forward, he just sort of said, to hell with it, you know, Giga Chads, just simply play the next riff. Transitions are for chumps. And this time, we move into what could be considered the hook or the chorus of the song. The riff that is played here is very, very interesting. Essentially, it mirrors the lyrics. It's like asking a question and receiving an answer, or perhaps an echo, a call and response type riff here, right? Really, really fantastic songwriting here by Chuck, and the riff is really cool. Chuck cries out to us with these words, "Won't you join me on the perennial quest, reaching into the dark, retrieving light? Search for answers on the perennial quest, where dreams are followed and time is a test." These lyrics here in the chorus are just extremely poetic and, like I mentioned earlier, fit together like fine carpentry with the riff underneath it here. You almost never hear metal being done in such a careful and fastidious way, and perhaps that is what makes Chuck's music so special. But I really think it's very clever how the lyrics are put over top of the music here, especially how the chorus here, which is essentially operating in a call and response type manner. The line, reaching into the dark, leaves us with just the reverb tail of Chuck's voice fading in with the rest and the break in the music, before being answered with the retrieving light line, with the guitar also playing the full riff, right? It's utterly fantastic arrangement and songwriting here, and yeah, it just really serves to highlight the lyrics and highlight the excellent poetry that's being sung here. Fantastic, I just absolutely love it. Now, after the chorus, we then move on into the bridge of the song. This song, like every other song on Symbolic and most of Death's catalog actually, followed the same formula, which I explain more in this video. And if you want to learn more about that, I implore you to go watch that, but make sure you watch it after. You know, watch time is very important to YouTube, right? But yeah, the bridge of the song is just packed full of outrageously heavy yet simple riffs. And the first one we hear is just one of my absolute favorites. It's just so simple yet crushingly heavy. I love how the power chords go down an octave in the final bar. It just makes it sound so punishing. A little bit like Life. And a little bit like the lyrics. Quote, "No time for mental crutches, the maker has moved on, I will take it raw and be on my way." End quote. And honestly, this may be my favorite stanza of lyrics from all of Death's catalog. No time for mental crutches, the maker has moved on. Like, what can you say, man? It's just so crushing, it's so final, it's so absolute. It's so stoic. In some very dark and troubling moments in my life, these lyrics come to mind all the time. It's just pure poetry. Now, again, we will get to this all in much greater depth, but it reminds me of this passage from Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor whose private journals were compiled after his death into a masterpiece of Stoic literature. Quote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it, and it is in your power to wipe out this judgment now." End quote. Right, that is essentially saying the exact same thing that Chuck said, but in much more flowery and poetic language. Chuck's is just so blunt. I will take it raw and be on my way. There's a brief detour in riffage before we are brought into another stanza of lyrics here in the same bridge. Quote, "Those that stood beside me, I'm glad you understand. Behind these written words, I share the simple plan to hang on to the way that we feel." Again, just utterly fantastic lyrics here, and I especially love the change in cadence when Chuck is sharing his simple plan for life. We must hang on to the way that we feel, which almost seems to contradict what was said previously in the stanza before, but I don't think so. One can hang on to the way that they feel, feel these intense feelings without allowing it to influence you in a negative way. Stoic philosophy isn't about not feeling any emotions at all. It's about controlling only what you can control, and that's your mind and your own feelings about what you just experienced, right? You must take it raw to feel all these feelings, yet continue on your way, on your quest. This is the great challenge which all of us face, the eternal struggle, the perennial quest. And to quote Marcus Aurelius one more time before we move on here, quote, "Everything happens in such a way as you are formed by nature to bear it. If then something happens to you, do not complain, but bear it. Remember that you are formed by nature to bear everything, and that it depends on your own opinion to make it endurable and tolerable, and by thinking that it is bearable, then it is in your interest and is your duty to do." End quote. As this section ends, we then move on into the first solo section. Underneath of the solo here, which is played by Bobby Kobla, we get one of the most emotional and Goliath guitar riffs ever put under a solo. I swear most of the time here, I don't even listen to the solo. I just listen to the riff underneath. It's just so good. And Bobby Kobla's solo that is played over top of this riff is very unique sounding solo as well. They pair together very well, and his solo here sounds extremely painful. Like it's almost excruciating. He plays a sort of stuttering rhythm to begin with before getting into these huge bends. It's just so unusual and dissonant that it almost becomes musical. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. Adding to this dissonant fact and sort of pain feeling is the fact that he uses a 29 fret guitar. A normal guitar stops at 22 or maybe 24 frets. So by having these extra very high notes, it adds to how piercing and pained the solo sounds. And it's really cool. You can see him play these solos on his 29 fret guitar on his YouTube channel. He just looks so casual and nonchalant by playing these solos. It's a great treasure trove of a YouTube channel, and it's a shame that he hasn't posted anything in 4 years. I would love for him to post more and maybe talk about his experience in death. That'd be very cool, but who knows, right? But in the context of the whole song and with the lyrics here, Bobby's solo really just fits right into it. The crushing, longing riff combined with a painful solo really paint a picture of a mind and in the internal battle which Chuck was describing through the lyrics. If the riff is the real world and its attempts to bring you down, its disturbing elements, its painful things, then Bobby's solo is sort of the internal mental battle to take it raw and to be on your way, right? Utterly fantastic songwriting here. I love it. What a fantastic section. Ugh, so good, man. Then abruptly, in classic Death fashion, we switch instantly to Chuck's solo. If Bobby's solo was the mental battle, then Chuck's solo is simply the stealing of one's mind to it, right? His solo, while still a bit off kilter in parts, feels much more determined and far less abstract, as well as the riff underneath it moves us back to the sort of traveling feel, like we are marching somewhere. It sounds familiar to some of the other riffs too, right? This is accentuated by Gene Hoglan's always unique drumming. Chuck's solo sees him playing with that familiar Phrygian feel, which makes it feel a little bit exotic as well, like we are moving through foreign lands and unfamiliar territory, maybe unfamiliar mental territory, right? Yet, as I mentioned earlier, the riff is somewhat familiar, being close enough to some of what we have heard earlier that it doesn't sound all too sort of abstract. It sort of sounds like we've maybe been here before a little bit. Great stuff. After another descending run, we are then taken right back to the first verse riff again, which, if we look at the Death song structure, is essentially the start of the repeat. Now, Chuck always changes the lyrics for the first verse before leaving the rest of the song's lyrics the same. It's a very interesting way to structure his lyrics and sort of gives like multiple hooks, right? You hear the same lyrics usually at least twice most of the time, besides the verses, like the first right part. Very interesting way to structure songs. I have traveled them. Now there's no turning back. This time around, with the last novel stanza, we hear Chuck bellow, quote, "From rivers of sorrow to oceans deep with hope, I have traveled them. Now there's no turning back, the limit, the sky. I ask my questions, why, what today, when tomorrow," end quote. I ask my questions, why, what today, when tomorrow. Really gorgeous lyrics. Apparently the line, quote, "From rivers of sorrow to oceans deep with hope," is the favorite lyrics of Chuck Schuldinger's mom. However, this was quoted, and that is information I got from genius.com, so take that with a grain of salt, but I believe it, why not? After this, the song essentially repeats more or less the exact same as the first time around until we get to the outro. Now, after the second chorus, the band does a small little refrain, a little guitar lead, before the heavy instruments all fade away, and then we are treated to an incredibly sorrowful, beautiful, and haunting acoustic guitar melody. It's a very pretty little repeating melody here that Chuck plays. He plays this very tenderly as well, going from an F minor arpeggio then to an F sus2. He plays these descending for 2 bars before switching chords and switching directions. The next 2 bars sees Chuck play the arpeggios in ascending pattern, which he then plays an A flat sus4 with no fifth, and then an A flat sus4 with a major 7. Very interesting chords. Hear them all played together on a piano roll here. I find the alternating pattern of ascending and descending arpeggios to be very symbolic. All of life's ups and downs, the tragedy and triumph, sort of all represented in this very short, brief chord progression and arpeggios. This is, of course, all followed by this very forlorn and reverb-drenched little leads that get played over top of this. There is also a brief little harmony section played together with 2 guitars, which is very beautiful and haunting, and this harmony fades off into the distance and echoes out, reverbs out into the darkness, leaving us with only the acoustic guitar melody to fade out to. Really gorgeous and haunting way to end the album, right? Remember, this is going to be the last Death song, right? These little leads that spiral off into the distance and background perhaps represent spirits or memories, which are then played over top of the acoustic guitar, creates a very pensive and contemplative ending to the song, right? It's almost hypnotizing in a way, perhaps a little bit in the way that meditation music helps you enter a different state of mind. This is what this ending is sort of suggesting to me, right? It's very interesting. And it really just caps off the song wonderfully. And I also think this may have been a sort of trial run for what would become Voice of the Soul, right? Acoustic guitars and reverb-drenched leads. It's a very, very striking sound that leaves a great impression on you, right? It's just very powerful. Musically, then, Perennial Quest feels like Chuck took us on a journey with him, from the sort of freewheeling, unsure intro riff, to the riffs which make you feel like you're traveling along with him, to that gargantuan and crushing bridge with that, internal battle solos, right? To the final serene acoustic outro. A really, really fantastic piece of music and a perfect example of Chuck Schuldiner genius songwriting. Now, let us move on to the lyrics here. I have thrown a few different things at you over the course of this deep dive, namely perennialism and stoicism. Now, while I have no proof that Chuck studied or practiced any of this, I find the lyrics of Perennial Quest and even some of the other songs in their discography to be almost proof of it. Everyone knows that Chuck infamously had a few issues with his temper, canceling tours and writing very angry music directed at certain individuals. You could call this passion or maybe misdirected anger. Regardless, Chuck had of course felt like he'd been wronged by many people and would write music about it. Even in interviews, you could see a lot of this anger inside. For example, a lot of what Individual Thought Patterns was based upon was directed at former bandmates, managers, and the scene, right? Individual Thought Patterns is a very, very angry album. Yet, it seems starting at the time of Symbolic, his songwriting took a very different turn. Even in interviews around this time, you can sense a shift, right? Go read some of the interviews from earlier in the career to later on and you'll see it too. He seems to have gotten some sort of worldly perspective and wisdom from Individual Thought Patterns to Symbolic, which was then focused onto just one thing, his music. He sort of calmed down and gained this sort of, stoic outlook on life. Like, just go read some of the interviews here. And we mustn't forget that at the time of Symbolic, Chuck was still a young man, only around 28 years old. So I'm not sure if you ever read Meditations or Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, or if you'd even heard of the Perennial philosophy, right? And honestly, it doesn't even matter if he did or not. What matters is the music that he wrote and the music that he left us. And to me, the viewer, the listener, the observer, I clearly see deep wisdom in the words that he wrote, especially on the Symbolic album, but also on The Fragile Art of Existence and The Sound of Perseverance. I see a wisdom which transcends this American culture and zeitgeist of his time and tapped into something much deeper and profound. A wisdom which many brilliant minds of the past, centuries, even millennia ago, picked up upon. This is what keeps bringing me back to Death over and over and over again. As well, right, there's a lot of songs that are very critical of religion on Death's albums, but even on The Fragile Art of Existence, right, you can see Chuck sort of connecting all the dots. Maybe he's not so critical of religion, instead he's seeing it, taking a step back and looking and connecting the dots. Like, what is the song What If on The Fragile Art of Existence? What if when they saw shooting stars they thought it was a gift from beyond far? He's sort of saying that, maybe everything and all their religions come from one thing, but that's a song for another day. So, with that pre-ramble out of the way, let us get right into the lyrics of Perennial Quest here. The journey begins with curiosity and evolves into soul-felt questions. I think this first stanza is directly talking about himself. It all begins with simple curiosity, questions that I think cross everyone's mind at some point. Who am I? Why am I here? What comes next? What is my purpose? However, for most people, maybe it ends here, and for others, this quest for such vital knowledge on the nature of existence is ever so tantalizing, and thus this simple questioning evolves into a Faustian-esque quest for knowledge. On the stones that we walk and choose to make our path, sometimes never knowing, other times knowing too much. Here Chuck remarks that we are to choose our own path, to choose which stones we walk upon. For him, it was writing music. For me, it's obsessing over his music. Writing my own music, this YouTube channel, right? We each all have our own stones we walk upon, which all lead us to the same destination, which is, of course, right, death, the physical death of the mortal body. To me, this is what he speaks on in the following lines too. Some people drift along, seemingly unaware or uncaring of the physical realities of our bodies. Others are all too acutely aware of it. Both of these outcomes are undesirable. One must be cognizant of the physical reality of this mortal plane, yet not let it consume you. I'm sure you have met people, or perhaps yourself have met people who are paralyzed, or perhaps yourself are paralyzed by fear of the unknown. As with most things, balance is the way forward. These two stanzas are also paired with the riff I described earlier, sounding like time going by. Very interesting juxtaposition, which sees the lyrics describing the start of one's journey into these deep, soul-felt questions, and are paired with the more flowing nature of that section of music, right? We're on the journey now. We're out of the aimless period, onto the perennial quest. Filtering out the bad that holds us back, take hold of what is true to your hunger. hunger. Here in the next stanza, which sees a drastic change in music by the way, we get what seems to be a sort of mantra for Chuck. Let go of the bad which holds you back and holds you back from devoting yourself to what is fueling your passion, fueling your hunger. Taking a step out of the song for a moment and looking at the meta-narrative around death at the time, maybe we see Chuck, saying this mantra, declaring to himself that his real passion is to make much more melodic progressive metal with a clean singer, which would become Control Denied. This is very, very clear from interviews at the time. This was on the forefront of his mind. He was very excited about it, you can tell. Thus, to put this mantra in the crushing section of the song, which at the time, right, of course was supposed to be the last death song, is very telling at where his mind was at. Telling not only us, but maybe also reassuring himself through his own music to follow his hunger, to follow his passion, and to filter out the negativity around him abandoning the thing which brought him here in the first place, which of course is the band Death and death metal in general, right? Very, very interesting lyrics here to put in the last death song. A hunger that will not go away, plans for tomorrow, they will remain. This word that he uses, hunger, it's a very interesting way to describe what I think he is really referring to as passion. Hunger is a need, right? If you do not eat, you will die, and hunger is that feeling telling you to eat, right? To find nourishment. It's a primitive urge. Every life form on Earth hungers. Trees will lean into the sunlight, the spider lays the trap for the fly, and the starving man will commit heinous acts just to get his next meal. Thus, hunger as a metaphor for passion is a sort of super passion. One must achieve this lest they perish. Although here, perish could be in a much more metaphysical manner, like a spiritual perishment. I'm sure we've all met people who struggle to cope and rationalize with the abandonment of their own passions, right? Music, sports, art, etc., whatever it is, right? Oftentimes these people seem sort of dead inside. The hunger for their passion fading, leaving one to sit in remembrance of what could have been for the rest of their life. And I get it, I understand, right? Life gets in the way, things happen, right? Yet this hunger still remains. Your plans for tomorrow still remain, so does this hunger. The driving need to embrace your passion. This is sort of the perennial quest. It's always there, right? Never ending journey. Won't you join me on the perennial quest? Reaching into the dark, retrieving light. Search for answers on the perennial quest, where dreams are followed and time is a test. Here now in the chorus, Chuck almost seems to be begging us to join him, follow our own hunger, and join him on the grand perennial quest. As I mentioned earlier, the music pairs excellently with the lyrics here. To reach into the dark, the unknown, the distant, the scary, and try to retrieve something of light, right? Something of value, something worthy of one's own passion, one's own hunger, one's own perennial quest. To search for the answers to one's soul-filled questions, to try and achieve understanding, to try and achieve happiness, to filter out the bad and embrace one's hunger, to follow your dreams amongst the ultimate test of time. Really, really brilliant lyricism here, and it's just so much to unpack in just a small chorus. Really brilliant. The last lines of this chorus also will be the last lines of the song, so we will come back to this after here. No time for mental crutches, the maker has moved on, I will take it raw and be on my way. Now, when I talked about this line before, I quoted Meditations, and I will quote it again, but to me, this profoundly resonates with me. I lost my mother, who was otherwise very, very healthy, in just over 3 months to lung cancer. She went from walking around totally normal to withering away and being dead in less than 3 months. There was no time for mental crutches. The maker had moved on. I took it raw and went on my way. What else can you do, right? It obviously was a very, very extremely painful experience for me, but this line from Death and Stoic philosophy in general really helped calm the storm of emotions which came along with this. I tried not to let it affect me negatively, instead used it for strength. Now, of course, I don't know the intimate details of Chuck's life. I do know, however, that he lost his brother suddenly when he was younger. So I do wonder if these words came from the same event. That painful feeling, can bring forth some very beautiful poetry. But this line is just about as blunt as a steamroller, right? Especially compared with that punishing, simple, and profane riff. Truly just fantastic and great music lyric interplay here. It's just so, like I said earlier, it's just so final, so absolute, so resolute. You must take it raw and be on your way. That's it. Back to Meditations again one last time. Quote, do not disturb yourself by thinking of the whole of your life. Do not let your thoughts at once embrace all the various troubles which you may expect to befall you. But on every occasion ask yourself, what is there in this which is intolerable and past bearing? You will be ashamed to confess. At the next place, remember that neither the future or past pains you, but only the present. But This is reduced to a very little if you only contain it. You should scold your mind if it is unable to hold out even against this, end quote. Marcus Aurelius says it in this beautiful and profound prose and just beautiful, beautiful words, and Chuck Schuldiner distills it down to its purest and most blunt essence. Absolutely one of my favorite lines in all of music. Those that stood beside me, I'm glad you understand. Behind these written words, I share the simple plan to hang on to the way that we feel. Again, these lyrics seem to suggest that Chuck is imploring us to join with him, to attempt to understand what he is saying. It's all a very simple plan, right? Be not disturbed by that which you cannot control. Hang on to what you feel and use the hunger you feel for strength, but do not let it blow you off course. And most importantly, to take it raw and be on your way. It's the only way forward. This is the distilled philosophy of Chuck Schuldiner. Pure and simple in music form, absolutely genius. Yet, there is one last novel stanza which we need to look at. From rivers of sorrow to oceans deep with hope, I have traveled them. Now there's no turning back, the limit, the sky. I ask my questions, why, what today, when tomorrow. I love this metaphor, right? Rivers of sorrow and oceans of hope. The sorrowful rivers flow into the hopeful oceans, which then evaporate and rain down upon the land, which once again fuels these rivers. In essence, sorrow and hope are two faces of the same coin. One flows from the other. Without sorrow, there is no hope, and without hope, there is no sorrow. It's like without shadow, there is no light. Without contrast, there is no differentiation. Without the valleys, there are no peaks. These most human emotions ebb and flow like the meandering paths of rivers and the currents and tides of oceans. Chuck exclaims that he has traveled them and there is no turning back. Now the limit is the sky, the firmament, what lies beyond. So we ask the questions, why, what, and when? This is the perennial quest, the eternal journey, the never-ending cycle. All things flow into each other. All questions will be answered and new questions raised. And on this perennial quest, there's no turning back, as there is no turning back time, which of course is the great test. Where dreams are followed and time is a test. Chuck leaves us on these last brilliant words as the acoustic guitar section slowly take over. The outro fades, and if you're playing the album on repeat, the album leads right back into Symbolic, which is another very interesting example of Chuck's own personal philosophy. I did a whole deep dive on that song as well. If you're interested, right here, you can click it. But with that, Perennial Quest is done. A true monolith of a song which sees Chuck leave us clues and little insights into how to live and behave, but also mantras which we can use in our own lives. He begs us to filter out the bad, which holds us back, and to take hold of our hunger, to act with passion and courage, and to not let bad distract us from our mission, to take it raw and be on our way. To put it extremely simple, right? It seems that Chuck was imprinting some of his vast wisdom that he had gained from all his years into this one song here. Absolutely fantastic and one of the best pieces of music ever put onto CD. Perennial Quest. Rest in peace, Chuck. I've been Varvis. Cheers.